The alien king once commanded legions, his voice shaping the fate of planets, his every word feared and obeyed. His empire stretched across countless systems, a force no species dared challenge. He had trusted his generals, his advisors, all the people who now plotted against him. In the corridors of power, whispers had become shouts, and loyalty had rotted into treachery. A failed coup attempt had shaken the empire's core. Those closest to him, once loyal beyond question, saw the perfect opportunity to seize control, spinning a tale of his incompetence, blaming him for the failed power play. To them, the king had become an obstacle, a relic of a past they were eager to erase. As he was dragged before the council, his heart hardened with disbelief. How could they, the very people he had lifted from obscurity, turn so easily? But there were no second thoughts in their eyes. His fate was sealed, and no appeal to their shared history, no reminder of the battles they had won together, would sway them. They stripped him of his royal protection, took away his authority, his rights, even his dignity. The decision was made swiftly: exile. Not a public execution, no, the council didn't want martyrdom to rally his supporters. They wanted him forgotten, left to rot on a remote world no one would ever think to search. The king, once a figure of towering strength, now stood alone as his ship's engines fired one last time, abandoning him on a desolate planet. The cold air cut through him, unyielding as the barren landscape stretched into nothingness. His people were gone. The realization hit like a physical blow. His allies, his kin, every soul he had fought to protect, they had all left him to die. The vastness of his betrayal was overwhelming. He tried to move, tried to plan an escape, but the planet itself seemed to conspire against him. The atmosphere was thin, the ground hard and cracked. There was no shelter, no sign of life. Only the eerie silence of the forsaken world. He had no tools, no resources, no advanced technology at his disposal. What remained of his imperial pride was quickly overtaken by the sharp pangs of hunger, thirst, and the growing realization that he was utterly alone. Days passed, or perhaps it had been weeks. Time lost meaning on this lifeless rock. Each sunrise brought only more of the same, endless, harsh emptiness. His body, once strong, was weakening. His injuries, sustained during the coup, had not healed. There was no way to tend to them. Every movement sent a fresh wave of pain through his limbs, and his alien physiology, so accustomed to the advanced medical care of his empire, had no way to adapt to the primitive conditions. His legs faltered beneath him more often now, his once proud figure hunched and broken. At night, when the cold sank deep into his bones, he would think of his empire. The sprawling cities that once echoed with his commands, the loyal soldiers who had sworn to die for him. Had any of them protested? Had any of them spoken out as the council sealed his fate? He doubted it. Betrayal had been too complete, too orchestrated. And now, they would continue without him, reshaping the empire in their image, while he wasted away, forgotten and alone. He had expected more. For all the battles he had fought, the conquests he had led, for all the power he had wielded, he had never thought his end would come in such a quiet, ignoble way. There was no grand showdown, no glorious last stand. Just nothing. A slow, inevitable decay on a planet where even the wind had no voice. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, had dulled with the weariness of a broken spirit. His hands trembled as they reached for food that wasn't there, water that didn't exist. He couldn't fight it anymore. This was death, creeping up on him, stripping him down to his most base instincts. Sometimes he thought of calling out, as though someone, anyone, might hear his cries across the stars. But what would be the point? His empire had moved on. The galaxy would not mourn him. The council had ensured that his name, once feared and respected, would fade from memory. He was no longer a king. He was nothing more than a discarded pawn in a game he had once dominated. On the edge of unconsciousness, as his mind began to shut down from exhaustion and starvation, the king found himself questioning everything. Was this how all power ended? In abandonment, in isolation? He had ruled worlds, yet here he was, a ruler without a kingdom, a king without followers. And worst of all, the people he had loved and protected were the ones who had cast him aside. There was no greater pain than knowing he had been abandoned by his own. The horizon blurred, and his vision dimmed, but the agony of betrayal never left him. It gnawed at him, deeper than any physical wound. He was alone, forgotten, waiting for death to claim him as the final silence fell over the barren world. The alien king's vision blurred as his body weakened further, the weight of impending death heavy on his mind. Lying motionless on the barren ground, he caught a glimpse of movement in the distance, something unfamiliar, something alive. For a long time, he couldn't be certain if it was real or a hallucination brought on by starvation. But the flashes of motion, small, organized, and deliberate, stirred a faint spark of curiosity. He had resigned himself to his fate, but now, driven by a mixture of desperation and instinct, he willed his broken body to move. With each step, agony shot through his limbs. His once proud figure stumbled and swayed, driven only by the distant sight of life. The terrain was unrelenting, jagged and treacherous, and his legs threatened to give out more than once. But still, he pressed on. As he drew closer, what he had first taken for illusions became clearer. Small shelters, crude compared to the majestic towers of his empire, yet standing resilient against the elements. Whoever they were surviving in this hostile place, something he had failed to do alone. His mind reeled with possibilities. Could it be his people, an advanced outpost, or remnants of some forgotten empire? Yet what he saw as he approached was different from anything he knew. Humanoid figures moved between the shelters, their clothing simple, their technology primitive. They weren't his kind, nor any species he recognized from the stars. They were something else, something unexpected. They were human. The king collapsed just as he neared the settlement's edge, his strength finally failing him. The humans spotted him almost immediately, rushing to his aid. He could feel their hands on him, their voices, though alien to his ears, soft and filled with concern. They spoke in a language he couldn't understand, but the tone carried no malice, only urgency. They didn't know who he was. They didn't recognize him as a ruler or a threat. To them, he was simply another being in need. His consciousness flickered in and out as they carried him into their settlement. A few words penetrated the haze, disjointed phrases about medical supplies, food, and shelter. He felt their hands, skilled but gentle, tending to his injuries with methods far more basic than what he was used to. Their technology was crude, primitive even, compared to the sophisticated tools of his empire. Yet there was a warmth to it, a genuine care that his own people had never shown him. They didn't leave him to die, didn't abandon him as weak or useless. They helped. Over the next few days, the king's strength began to return, though his body still ached from the injuries and exhaustion. He observed the humans around him, their movements, their interactions. They were nothing like the cold, calculating members of his council, nor the obedient soldiers he had once commanded. These humans, though limited in resources, worked together with an ease that baffled him. Their settlement was modest, barely capable of supporting its population, yet they shared everything. No one was left behind, no one cast aside as unworthy or weak. They survived as one. He soon learned the basics of their language. Through halting words and gestures, they explained their situation. They were settlers stranded on this planet after a ship malfunction had left them without hope of rescue. Yet despite the odds, they had adapted. Their settlement, though small, was thriving. They had figured out how to harvest what little the planet offered, how to protect themselves from the elements, and how to sustain a fragile balance in their ecosystem. The leader of the humans, a pragmatic woman with a quiet authority, introduced herself one day as they sat around a fire. She spoke with a calm that belied the harshness of their environment. There was no grand display of power or dominance in her presence, nothing like the rigid hierarchy the king was used to. Yet in her, he saw a strength that ran deeper than mere titles. Her people respected her not out of fear, but out of trust. She asked him few questions, respecting his silence about his past, yet offering what aid she could without hesitation. It was the healer, though, who spent the most time with him. A wiry man with kind eyes and rough hands, he worked tirelessly to ensure the king's wounds healed properly. Their conversations, limited by language, were mostly about survival, how the humans had managed to carve out a life on this inhospitable world. The king listened, increasingly fascinated by how this small group of fragile beings had done what his powerful empire had not. They had endured. He watched the humans go about their daily lives with a quiet efficiency, their teamwork almost instinctive. There were no rigid ranks, no constant need for orders or structure. They simply helped each other. One day, as he observed them repairing a broken shelter, it struck him how different their methods were from those of his own people. His empire had relied on strength, technology, and fear to maintain order. The humans relied on something far simpler: compassion, unity, and trust. What surprised him most was their willingness to help him without question, without knowing his history or status. In his world, help came at a cost, favors were exchanged only for power or advantage. But here, among the humans, there was no hidden agenda. They had taken him in, a stranger, because they saw him in need, not because they expected something in return. That was alien to him, in a way more profound than their physical forms or language. Their kindness was not a calculated move in some larger game. It was simply who they were. As his body healed, so too did something within him. His bitterness at being abandoned by his own people hadn't vanished, but in its place grew a sense of quiet gratitude. He hadn't thought much of humans before. His empire had considered them an insignificant species on the galactic stage. But now, lying under the stars, listening to their laughter and quiet conversations in the night, he saw them for what they truly were. Resilient, adaptive, and above all, compassionate. He began to realize that these humans, with their crude tools and limited resources, had something his empire had long lost: the ability to care for others without asking why. It was a strength that no amount of power or technology could replicate. And in that moment, he understood that perhaps it wasn't just his body that had been saved on this desolate planet. The humans had saved something far more precious: his sense of purpose. As the alien king lay bedridden, his body still recovering from the injuries and exhaustion that had nearly claimed his life, he couldn't help but marvel at the simplicity of the humans' medical care. Their methods were rudimentary by his empire's standards. Where he had once been accustomed to advanced biotech and automated healers, these humans used basic tools and techniques. Still, the results were undeniable. Slowly but surely, his strength began to return. Every day, the human healer tended to him with patience, never once showing frustration at the slow pace of his recovery. At first, the king remained distant, unwilling to engage beyond the necessities. He was royalty, after all, and they were simple beings. They couldn't possibly understand the depth of his suffering, the betrayal of an empire that had once revered him as its godlike ruler. But as the days passed, he found himself drawn into conversations, initially out of boredom, but soon out of genuine curiosity. The healer, and occasionally others from the settlement, would sit with him, sharing stories of their own struggles, of how they had come to this planet, of their distant home world called Earth. What surprised the king most wasn't their technology or lack thereof, but the ease with which they spoke of hardships. For them, hardship wasn't a sign of weakness but a part of life. They had lost their ship, they were stranded on a hostile world, and yet there was no bitterness in their voices, only resilience. The leader would visit him from time to time, offering news of the settlement's daily affairs. She never spoke down to him, never questioned his silence about his past, but always included him as if he were one of them. This egalitarian approach baffled him. In his empire, rank defined everything. There was no such thing as equality. Power flowed in one direction, always upward, never shared. As the days turned to weeks, the king found himself drawn into discussions about human history. They told him of their world, of its wars and triumphs, its innovations and failures. They spoke of their struggles, not just in surviving here but as a species. The more he listened, the more he realized that humanity was far more complex than he had imagined. They had fought countless wars, yes, but they had also built societies based on cooperation and mutual respect. Where his empire thrived on conquest, humanity seemed to thrive on adaptation and change. In turn, he spoke, albeit cautiously, of his own empire, though he downplayed his role in it. He described the vastness of the territory they controlled, the advanced technology that had allowed them to conquer entire star systems, and the rigid structure that had kept order for centuries. The humans listened, some in awe, others in quiet contemplation. Their questions weren't about the technology or the scale of his empire but about its people. What were their lives like? How did they govern? Did the empire care for all its citizens equally? These questions caught the king off guard. In his world, such things were irrelevant. The empire existed to expand, to dominate. Equality and fairness were secondary concerns, if they were considered at all. One evening, as he sat outside for the first time since his arrival, watching the humans repair equipment with makeshift tools, he couldn't help but reflect on the differences between their society and his own. His empire's superiority had always been tied to its technological and military might. Power, in his world, was everything. Yet here were these humans, without advanced resources, creating a thriving community out of sheer willpower and cooperation. It was something he hadn't anticipated. How could such a primitive species survive where others, more powerful by his standards, would have perished? His initial pride, once so unshakable, began to waver. The humans worked without any clear hierarchy, solving problems collectively, each person's voice seemingly equal to the next. There was no scrambling for power, no jockeying for position. He had seen moments of selflessness among them, where one would give up food or supplies for another without hesitation. That concept was foreign to him. In his empire, such sacrifices were calculated moves, strategies to gain favor or secure an advantage. Here, they were simply part of life. One day, as he attempted to help the healer with a minor task, still weak but determined to contribute in some way, he observed a young human woman hand over her portion of water to an elder. There was no fanfare, no acknowledgement, just a simple gesture of compassion. It was in that small, unremarkable moment that something inside him shifted. These humans weren't just surviving through brute force or luck. They were surviving because they valued each other in ways that his own people never had. They thrived on cooperation and empathy, qualities that his empire had long since abandoned in favor of control and dominance. The more he watched them, the more he questioned the foundation of his empire. Was power really the ultimate goal? Or was it something more? Perhaps power didn't come from controlling others but from working together. The human strength lay not in their ability to conquer but in their ability to adapt, to unite, and to care for one another without expecting anything in return. It was a power he had never understood, but now, he couldn't ignore it. By the time he was able to move about the settlement with some independence, he had learned much about these strange, resilient beings. He respected them in ways he hadn't thought possible. They were so different from his people, yet they had survived, even thrived, in conditions that would have broken others. Their adaptability, their willingness to share knowledge, and their ability to find strength in unity, these were traits his empire had dismissed as weaknesses. But now, he saw them for what they were, strengths far more enduring than any weapon or piece of technology. As he stood at the edge of the settlement, watching the humans go about their lives, he realized that they had taught him something his own people never could. They had shown him the value of trust, of compassion, and of resilience, not through grand gestures or speeches but through the small, everyday acts that held their community together. And as he looked toward the horizon, the weight of his empire's betrayal felt a little lighter. These humans, so simple and unremarkable at first glance, had revealed a truth he had been blind to all his life. That real power didn't come from domination, but from the bonds between people. As the alien king regained his strength, the humans continued to treat him with the same straightforward kindness they had from the beginning. But now, he felt different, more a part of their world than just a helpless outsider. The humility that had started to take root within him now deepened, and with it came the understanding that he could no longer hide his past from those who had saved him. One night, as they sat around a small fire, the stars shimmering above them, the king began to speak. His voice, though measured, carried the weight of years of power and authority, the kind he had been born into and believed would never fail him. He told them of his empire, of the immense responsibility he once carried, and of the treachery that had ripped it away from him. He was no ordinary exile, he revealed. He was their king, once the most powerful being in his galaxy, betrayed by his closest allies in a coup that left him stranded and forgotten. The humans listened without awe or shock. There were no gasps of surprise, no bowing before him as he had expected, or even a moment of disbelief. Their leader simply nodded, as though his royal status didn't change anything. "That must have been hard," she said, her tone filled with empathy rather than reverence. He was taken aback by their calm, almost indifferent response. In his empire, such a revelation would have caused waves of panic or devotion. But here? They still saw him as just another person, albeit one with a more complicated history. Their lack of reaction confused him at first, but it also left him intrigued. He was royalty, a being of immense power and legacy, yet to them, he was still just a man who had been wronged, who needed help, and who had something worth fighting for. It was both humbling and liberating. For the first time in his life, he wasn't defined by his status. They didn't fear him or seek to use him for their own gain. They were simply trying to help him because they believed it was right. The humans saw his situation not as a political dilemma, but as a personal one. They understood that the balance of power in the galaxy had been thrown off, and they were willing to help restore it. Not for riches, not for glory, but because they believed in fairness and justice, even if those values seemed naive to the king. Yet, in their simplicity, he found strength. Together, they began to devise a plan. The humans, though severely limited in terms of technology and weaponry, had something his empire's enemies lacked: creativity. They were thinkers and problem solvers, able to adapt in ways that no one else could. They didn't rely on brute force to win their battles. Instead, they used ingenuity, surprise, and strategy. The king was used to large fleets, direct confrontations, and displays of overwhelming power. The humans, on the other hand, saw warfare as a puzzle to be solved with the least amount of resources and the greatest impact. As they strategized, the king learned just how clever humans could be. They didn't need advanced ships or powerful weapons to turn the tide. What they had was a deep understanding of guerrilla tactics, the kind that could dismantle a larger, more powerful force from within. Their leader outlined a plan that involved small, precise strikes at key points within his empire's infrastructure, weaknesses his own people would never have considered vulnerable. They wouldn't fight to reclaim his throne with armies. Instead, they would undermine the usurper's power in ways they could never anticipate. The king listened as they spoke of ambushes, misdirection, and exploiting the enemy's arrogance. It was all so foreign to him. His empire had always thrived on overwhelming force, but that kind of approach wasn't an option here. The humans, however, were at their best when the odds were stacked against them. They thrived in chaos, using their smallness to their advantage. Where his people sought dominance through size and strength, humans succeeded through unpredictability and adaptability. It was a kind of brilliance the king had never considered. As they developed the plan, the bond between him and the humans deepened. These people, so unassuming at first, now earned his genuine respect. They had no reason to help him. They weren't his subjects or beneficiaries of his empire. Yet they were risking everything for him, not because of his title, but because they saw something worth fighting for in his cause. Their willingness to help was born out of a belief in doing the right thing, a value that had long since been lost in the cold calculations of his empire's politics. For the first time, the king began to question his own assumptions about power and leadership. He had always believed that might made right, that rulers commanded through fear and control. But the humans operated on a different set of values. They trusted each other, relied on collaboration rather than domination. Their strength came from their connections, from the bonds they built with one another. It was a form of power his people had never understood, and now, he realized, it was the key to reclaiming his throne. As the plan took shape, the king found himself humbled by the humans' ingenuity. Their ideas were unconventional, almost reckless by his standards, but they made sense in the context of their strengths. They knew they couldn't match the Empire's military power, but they didn't need to. Their goal was to strike fast, to destabilize the usurper's control, and create the conditions for a rebellion from within. His people, arrogant and overconfident in their victory, would never see it coming. And so, the alliance was forged, not out of obligation or manipulation, but out of mutual respect and necessity. The humans had given him something far more valuable than weapons or ships. They had given him a new perspective on leadership, on power, and on what it meant to fight for something greater than oneself. As the final details of their plan were solidified, the king realized that he had changed in ways he hadn't expected. He had come to this desolate planet a broken ruler, abandoned by his own people, and now, thanks to the humans, he was ready to return, not as the man he once was, but as someone new, someone who understood that real power came not from ruling over others, but from standing with them. The time had come to put their daring plan into action. The alien king, once thought lost to the galaxy, prepared to make his return. The humans, with their seemingly meager resources and unconventional strategies, had developed a plan that relied not on power, but on precision and deception. The king's empire had grown complacent in his absence, believing their technology and military strength made them untouchable. But as the humans had taught him, arrogance was the greatest weakness. The first step was to infiltrate the empire's capital. The humans, relying on their knowledge of guerrilla tactics, created distractions and diversions far from the central hub of power. Small, targeted strikes destabilized key infrastructure, but nothing large enough to draw major attention. The enemy forces, technologically superior but rigid in their thinking, saw these actions as nothing more than minor nuisances. They didn't realize that each disruption was part of a larger plan, a carefully orchestrated misdirection to mask the real objective: the king's return. The king, with the humans by his side, slipped through the cracks of the Empire's defenses. While the Empire's soldiers scrambled to respond to the false threats, the real infiltration occurred under their very noses. The humans had taught the king that war wasn't just about strength, it was about adaptability, and this was something his enemies had never learned. They believed that no one could challenge them without matching their firepower. They never considered that a small, nimble group, armed with intelligence and strategy, could defeat them. As they approached the heart of the capital, where the king's former allies turned traitors now held court, the tension mounted. The humans, calm under pressure, made adjustments as they went, altering the plan as necessary to account for the unpredictable nature of battle. The king, once rigid in his command style, had come to trust their instincts. He had learned from their quick thinking, their ability to adapt on the fly, and now he saw firsthand how it could turn the tide of conflict. But not everything went as smoothly as they had hoped. As they neared the palace, a trap was sprung. The king's enemies had anticipated his return, perhaps not expecting the humans' involvement, but still prepared for a confrontation. Ambushes were set, and suddenly, the infiltration team found themselves cornered, cut off from their exit routes. The king's heart sank. It seemed like all their efforts might be for nothing. But the humans didn't panic. Where the king saw overwhelming odds, the humans saw opportunity. They quickly assessed their surroundings, improvising in the chaos. The leader of the human group, calm and collected, took charge. Using the terrain to their advantage, they set their own counter-trap, creating a bottleneck that funneled the enemy forces into a vulnerable position. The battle that followed was swift, a testament to the humans' ability to turn even the worst situation to their advantage. With the immediate threat neutralized, the group pressed forward. The final confrontation awaited them in the throne room, where the traitors had gathered. The king, flanked by his human allies, entered the chamber where those who had betrayed him now stood. They were stunned. None had believed he would return, and even if he did, they assumed he would be alone, weakened, and easy to dispatch. But here he was, stronger than before, and with an unexpected and dangerous ally by his side. The traitors, still underestimating the humans, focused their attention on the king. They accused him of weakness, of losing his claim to the throne. But the king, his voice steady and filled with the resolve he had gained during his exile, made it clear that their reign of treachery had come to an end. The traitors attempted one last stand, relying on their superior weapons and numbers. Yet, as the humans had shown him time and time again, brute force wasn't everything. The humans, using the element of surprise once more, executed a plan so unconventional that the enemy forces were thrown into complete disarray. Small, calculated strikes to key systems within the palace, systems the Empire had taken for granted, rendered the traitors' technological advantage useless. Their weapons failed, their communications jammed, their defenses crumbled. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The humans had won the battle without ever needing to match the Empire's military might. In the final moments, the king confronted the ringleader of the coup, the general who had been closest to him and who had orchestrated his downfall. There was no grand monologue, no speech about revenge. The king's actions spoke for themselves. He had learned much in his time with the humans, and he knew that true power came not from domination, but from understanding and unity. The general, defeated both physically and mentally, was taken into custody, and the reign of the traitors was over. With the Empire now under his control again, the king faced a new challenge, rebuilding what had been broken. But this time, he would not do it alone. The humans had taught him the value of cooperation, of treating others as equals, and of thinking beyond mere survival or conquest. He vowed to rule differently, not with an iron fist, but with the wisdom he had gained from those who had saved him. His empire would become something new, something stronger, built on the foundations of trust and respect. As the dust settled, the humans quietly prepared to return to their own lives. They had no interest in ruling empires or holding positions of power. They had done what they came to do, and now their part in the story was over. The king offered them anything they wanted in gratitude, but they asked for nothing. Their role had never been about personal gain, it was about doing what was right. And that was enough for them. The king watched as they departed, realizing that their influence on him would last far beyond this moment. They had changed him, and through him, they had changed the course of his empire. Their quiet dignity and moral strength had left an indelible mark, one that would shape the galaxy in ways they would never seek credit for. As they disappeared into the horizon, the king knew that his empire's future was secure, not because of its armies or technology, but because of the lessons he had learned from a small group of humans, lessons of adaptability, creativity, and the strength that came from unity. And with that knowledge, he took his place on the throne once again, ready to lead not just with power, but with wisdom.